Many have asked the question, well, why does the Bible say that Noah lived 900, 700 years? Why did the people before the flood live hundreds of years, 900, etc.? And how comes we only live 70 to 80 years, maybe 90? On their 100th birthday in Britain, a person will get a letter from the Queen. Now it's the King. So just a little chart here. Little chart here just illustrates that, of Bible characters from the days of Adam. As you see, Adam lived 930 years, Methuselah, and then you get right down to Abraham, who only lived 175 years. So progressively, the ages of people have got lessened. Why? Why is that? Well, it does say this in Genesis chapter 2, when Adam and Eve, who were made in God's image, so they had no time limit, they were only told this. They said, God said, and as for the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat from it, for in the day you eat from it, you will certainly die. Of course, the term day in the Bible, because God created 7 creative days, and apparently we're still living in his day of rest, the 7th creative days. The phrase day means period of time, so it could be your grandfather's day. In the Apostle Peter talks about a day to God like being 1,000 years. The references to the scriptures will be in the subtitles. In Psalm 90 it talks about 1,000 years. A watch during the night is like 1,000 years to God. And a watch during the night for a Hebrew soldier was 4 hours, so that would make it 6,000 years. So Adam, of course, we know lived 930 years. So he died within the day. So, but why do humans die? Well, that's another subject. But they died because they drew away from God, and he cast them out the Garden of Eden, didn't he? So they couldn't get their hands on the tree, the fruit for the tree of life. That's because they separated them from God, and he is the source of life. So if you separate yourself from the source of life, it's like disconnecting the power supply, and eventually the fan of human life comes to an end. Now, why has it progressively got worse? Some people liken it to a jelly mould. You keep on using the same mould and it will get worse the longer you use it. So it's saying that humans over the years degenerated. Maybe there's another reason. In Genesis chapter 6, it says this. Just at the time of the flood, he says this. Jehovah said, my spirit will not tolerate man indefinitely because he's only flesh. And the inference there is he was going after only flesh. He had lost being a spiritual person. Then he says, accordingly, his days will amount to 120 years. Now, the reference here says that the 120 years is either, in this one here, in this Texas Bible, it says, my spirit will, they will only live 120 years longer. So, but does that also mean that humans will no longer live more than 120 years? Their time spans will get less, which is, of course, what has happened according to Bible history. An interesting thing about that chronological data that you saw from that godsword.org was that it lists the ancestors to Jesus Christ, which is repeated in Matthew and Luke chapter 3. Really interesting. So you can calculate how long we've been here since the creation of Adam. Now, there's something else that Almighty God has done. In Ecclesiastes, it says he's put time eternity in our hearts. So because we were made in God's image, humans were created to live without fear of dying, without getting ill, suffering or dying. because they were in God's image. There was no concept of death. Death was only mentioned in connection to disobedience. So if they hadn't disobeyed, they would have lived eternally. So when it says that time eternity was put in humans' hearts, this is why if you lose a loved one, you lose a child in death, you lose your parents in death, you lose a loved one, we have so much trouble coping with grief because we weren't designed to suffer from grief. We weren't designed to lose loved ones. That was not part of the original plan. So that explains why humans, and if you look back through the years, you'll find that Moses lived 120 years. So the one before him was Abraham, who lived 175. Moses lived 120. Joshua, the one who took over the nation of Israel and led them into the promised land, was called Joshua. He lived 110 years. King David lived 75. So as you can see, progressively people started to get to the average ages that we live today, despite all our medical advances. So that explains why, but that's not God's original plan. Jesus died so that people could get everlasting life back. But he's had to do that because the human race is trapped. They're kind of slaves to sin, and sin, of course, is sin and death. The human race is condemned to. So, another question you could ask is climate change something that Christians should support? Another question for you. Thank you.